So today we're going to take a look at some life forms that are smaller than cells. That's why I start out with this question: is it alive? Prions and viruses do not meet the characteristics of life. They don't have cells. And so, real quick discussion. Most of this week is going to focus on viruses, which I know the coronavirus is first and foremost in most of your minds. But I just wanted to introduce you to this idea of prions real quick. So this word is actually a contraction. Proteinaceous infectious agents. We learned before that on is a root, an ending, that means bit of or piece of. So prions are proteins free, meaning they circulate within organisms, around organisms, and by definition they cause disease. That's what the I in the word prion stands for, infectious. They do not meet the characteristics of life because they're just a protein. And the protein is identical in amino acid sequence to a normal functioning, non-sickness causing protein, but for some reason it's folded differently and that causes disease. This would be kind of like if I gave you a crumpled piece of paper to put in your notebook, and when you put that in your notebook, it caused all of the other papers in your notebook to become crumpled. And that's sort of how a prion works. And so there's not a whole lot out there on this, but I just wanted to introduce you to this idea so that at least you've heard it, at least you have some background on it. We're not really sure how it works, but the prion enters the cell, causes other proteins to become misshapen, causes disease. There are several well-known strange diseases: bovine spongiform encephalopathy, BSE, or mad cow disease. Most of you have heard of mad cow disease probably. Mad cow disease popped up in the United Kingdom soon after an outbreak of a similar prion disease called scrapie in sheep. It's called scrapie because they get itchy and they scrape themselves against fence posts or gates until their skin pierces and actually until their intestines fall out and they die from that. So that's why it's called scrapie. And so they had this big outbreak in the United Kingdom and people thought, oh, we have all these dead, sick sheep. What should we do with them? Oh, I know. Let's grind them up and feed them to our cows. And boom, mad cow disease when the prions entered the feed supply of the cows. So Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease is a human form of BSE, and there's possibly some connection between eating animals with this prion disease. Maybe not. That statistic is a little bit old there. 325 deaths in the United States in 2009. And so we're not really sure exactly how it's transmitted, but it does exist. And then the one that probably a lot of you have heard a lot about, because in Pennsylvania for the last 2 years or so, chronic wasting disease has popped into our culture. And so chronic wasting disease is another prion disease. It has very similar effects to the other ones that we've just talked about. The animal becomes disoriented because what happens in all of these, going back to the BSE and the bovine spongiform encephalopathy, pathy means disease, encephalo means inside the head, spongiform means holes in it, like a sponge. And so cow, holes like a sponge inside the head disease. So in other words, the brain gets holes inside of it, and that causes lack of coordination, all kinds of other mental things. It's also what's called mad cow disease, mad meaning crazy. And so chronic wasting disease affects cervids, members of the family Cervidae. And so here you see all the way back in 2006, where it was spread across the country, and you could see even 14 years ago it was in New York and West Virginia, so it was just a matter of time until it's in Pennsylvania, and it is now. And so those are there. And then another human form that we're going to talk about in just a minute. So there's some normal brain tissue, and then scrapie from sheep, CJD from humans in the bottom left, and BSE in cattle, and you can see there's little holes in the tissue. And then there's Kuru. Kuru is a human prional disease transmitted by cannibalism. And cannibalism in this case, not what you might think of, but ritual cannibalism as part of a funeral service where you always want to have part of your loved one with you. And so to do that at the funeral, you cut open the head and you eat the brain. And this was practiced just by women and children in Papua New Guinea. And so the disease was pretty much restricted to women and children. That young man being held there is in his early 20s, and then he subsequently died. And in Papua New Guinea, the government outlawed this practice in the 1950s, and Kuru has virtually vanished from that population. There's no treatment for this because prions are versions of necessary proteins that are in your body, and so there's not really anything we can do about it. So moving on, viruses are much more complex than prions, and they're much better understood. We've known about viruses for about 100 years, and we've done a lot of work studying them. That's an animation of a virus, but it's based on electron micrographs. That little spaceship-looking thing on the surface of the cell, that's really what a bacteriophage looks like. And so there are two parts to a virus, the protein coat and the nucleic acid inside. And the nucleic acid can be DNA or RNA. Protein coat serves the purpose of protecting the nucleic acid and getting them into the host cells, and we're going to watch some animations and work on some things throughout this lesson that's going to show you how that works a little better. And then here's an example of a SARS virus that was in 2002, I want to say, started out very much like coronavirus and then was eliminated and disappeared. It's also a coronavirus. And actually, I think some of the latest publications on this novel coronavirus that causes COVID-19 are using SARS-2 as the name of the virus. The bottom picture there is a bacteriophage on a bacterial cell. And so you can see that little spaceship looking thing infecting the cell. So the nucleic acid can be either, and if it's RNA, it can be reverse transcribed into DNA. So we talked about transcription being copying from DNA into RNA, but it can be copied backwards. RNA can be used to make DNA that can be put into the nucleus, stored there, or used. We're going to talk about those two pathways in a bit. So retroviruses, back viruses, are the ones that have to reverse transcribe their RNA into DNA. These are the most mutable, the most changeable. These are the ones that are most difficult to create a vaccine for, and coronavirus is one of these. So viruses don't make more of themselves. They don't have babies. So again, characteristics of life. They don't really meet it. They don't have a cell. They don't replicate. But they use the host cell. They hijack the system, use the ribosomes to build more. So what they do is they basically shut down all of the other genes in the cell so that only the viral DNA is being used. And eventually the cells fill with viruses and break, or they can just be transmitted out until the membrane gets damaged so much. You might remember in Cellcraft, you had that problem. And so here's a couple more pictures. Common cold virus. There's a receptor on the surface of a cell in the mucus lining of your nose, and that virus docks there, and it's like a lock and key. It lets it in, and in it goes. And then eventually, the cell's hijacked, fills up with viruses. The cell bursts. All of the viruses are released. You sneeze. They go everywhere. Some viruses just basically sneak in and put their DNA in later, and if they splice their DNA into the middle of an important gene, disrupting that gene, it can cause major problems. There are some cancers that are caused this way, where a gene that controls mitotic cell division gets disrupted by a virus, and so then cancer develops. Cells that are actively producing viruses are killed by your immune system. This is one of the reasons why that it feels so bad whenever you get a viral infection like the flu or the cold. You have these killer T cells that come around and they recognize that something bad is going on, and so they come in and they just destroy the cell. This would be kind of like if a bank has a hostage situation where a robber takes some hostages of the workers and the police show up and they just blow the bank up to make sure they get the bad guys. That's kind of how your immune system works. And so in this, here's another picture of a killer T cell killing an infected cell to keep it from producing viruses. So that's one of the reasons why you feel so bad. And HIV, which is the virus that causes AIDS, is a devastating virus in humans because it actually targets the T cells. And so the sick T cells are destroyed by other T cells, but eventually you run out of T cells to stop destroying virus, and you get overwhelmed by the virus. And there's an Edpuzzle video you're going to watch today that talks about why you don't get overwhelmed with viruses. And it's because of these T cells, but HIV actually attacks the police. So there are limited treatment options since it's inside you, using you. And that's one of the situations with what's going on right now, is the fact that there's not a whole lot we can do in terms of stopping viral replication because it uses your ribosomes, it uses your DNA and RNA polymerases, it uses all of these mechanisms inside of you, as you're going to see. And so it's very devastating, and there's not a whole lot we can do. We have a few limited treatment options, and that's one of the situations that's going on right now. The rest of this chapter in your textbook actually deals with bacteria, and we're not going to talk at all about that, but I know that's a topic that many of you are interested in, and it's actually a very important topic. So I would encourage you to explore in your textbook the rest of the information about microbes, tiny life forms, in addition to viruses, the bacteria.